Hello, this presentation is hosted by UGAIN, the University of Guelph Animal Interest Network, and today we're going to be talking about snakes as pets. So just a little bit about snakes. Snakes are ectotherms, meaning they're cold-blooded animals and their internal temperature varies with their surrounding environmental temperature. This means that they always need a heat source, whether that's a heating pad at the bottom of their cage or a heat lamp. Snakes are carnivores and therefore only eat meat. They don't have the proper digestive machinery to digest non-animal food, which is why, depending on your snake's size, you'll most likely be feeding them mice or rats. Snakes are solitary animals, so they don't like being pet and may not like to do much because they like spending time by themselves. This doesn't mean you can't handle your snake, but it just means that you need to be aware that they may not want to spend all the time in the world with you. Snakes shed their skin every few months as adults, which means you'll always need to have water in their tank to let them soak and rough surfaces in the cage to help them with the process. Finally, snakes are an egg-laying species, which means that they incubate in an egg until they're ready to hatch. Some of the basic needs of a snake. The first step of owning a snake is getting them the appropriate size terrarium, which is the fancy word for a cage for small land animals. It is important that the terrarium is as long as your snake, or longer, so that they can fully stretch out. You will need to take into account their natural habitat, as there are land, tree, underground, freshwater, and saltwater snakes. In the terrarium, it's important to provide hides so the snake can comfortably lie in protection. Snakes need a heat source in their cage. As mentioned before, there are heat pads and lamps, both with different pros and cons. Heat pads can be easier to manage, but it's harder to gauge the temperature of the pad and determine if it's right for your snake. Additionally, snakes have fewer heat sensors on their stomach, so they may stay on the pad not realizing it's too hot and get burnt. For heat lamps, they can be great to provide the correct lighting for your snake and give proper day/night cycle. However, the watt is very important because you don't want to overheat the terrarium. It's also important to make sure that the heat lamp isn't covering the entire tank, as you want to provide your snake with different microclimates so that they can choose the temperature they want. Each species of snake has a preferred optimum temperature zone, which is how you want to gauge if you're providing them the right environmental conditions. Food is another very important factor when it comes to snakes. For most pet snakes, you're probably only going to be feeding them mice or rats, but for larger snakes, other small mammals may be required for food. You can easily buy frozen mice and rats at the pet store, but feeding them live is another option. Frozen food is easier as they're easy to store and feed, but not all snakes will eat frozen food. Sometimes snakes will randomly decide they no longer want frozen food, and you may have to switch to live feeding. Live feeding can have some welfare concerns for both the stress of the snake and the prey, and if anyone gets injured in the process. It's a good idea to move your snake into a feeding box when you feed them, so they don't associate you with food when you come to their normal cage. When feeding frozen mice to snakes, you'll defrost the mouse and then dangle the mouse in front of the snake using tongs to stimulate them to eat. It's a really fascinating process, but it may take a few tries to get the hang of. They also need access to fresh water, even if they don't drink often. You'll want a water bowl that can fit their entire body so they can soak if desired. And then rough surfaces are needed to help them shed. Some of the pros of having a snake are that they require very basic care, so it's hard to go wrong with a snake. Because of this, you can actually leave them alone for a week and they'll survive. Although this is up to your discretion as you know your snake the best. They also make really fun and interesting pets that are definitely a conversation starter. Finally, snakes are pretty inexpensive. Most people I know never end up bringing their snake to the vet, although this isn't always the case. It's always better to be safe than sorry and do routine checkups at the vet. Some of the cons of having a snake are that they don't do much. Mine likes to stay in his tree all day, every day, only coming out sometimes, usually for food, water, or to switch spots. Snakes are not as cuddly as cats or dogs, but that doesn't mean you can't cuddle them. You just need to adjust your thinking on what a cuddle is. For some people, the food may be a con if you don't like handling dead animals. This is something that you can become used to, but some people may never get used to it. Snakes can also transmit salmonella, so that's always something you need to have under consideration. So, some common pet breeds. The top pictures of a corn snake, they're usually thinner and longer and more active, so when you take them out, they're more likely to explore. The bottom pictures of a ball python that are usually thicker, shorter, and less active. When you take them out, they're more likely to stay curled in a ball on the palm of your hand. These two breeds are commonly bred in North America and are the most common pet snakes. Both are non-venomous and good with people. So myth busting, sorry. You've probably heard time and time again that snakes are slimy. This is actually false. Snakes don't sweat and have very dry skin and scales. Their scales are just very smooth, and if you feel anything slimy, it is probably your own sweat from your hands on their body. Snakes eat other snakes. This is true. Usually this will only occur if there are two snakes of distinct different sizes that are together and one is hungry, or the large one is hungry. This is why you should never house snakes together. Snakes are deaf. This is false. They do not have eardrums or external ear openings, but instead have inner ears that feel vibrations through the ground. Snakes dislocate their jaw. This is also false. Snakes' jaws are not fused together at most of the joints, allowing for greater flexibility. Their chin is also not attached at the front, so they have two separate mandibles that separate, allowing them to widen their jaw and eat large prey. So some discussion questions for you to think about. Do you think snakes should be considered starter pets? What would you feed a snake live prey? And is snake breeding something that we should support? Here's some of the references I used to create this presentation. Please come join us with UGAIN on Thursdays at 6:30. Hope to see you there.